want me to kick it off? Want me to top?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. All right, everybody. We're here. We are finally doing the projects, the Hobby Perverts project. Kicking off with a little podcasting. I'm here with my good friend Dag. Dag, how are you feeling about now that we're here? Now that we're hobbying, we're meta hobbying.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about it?
Yeah, we're hobbying about hobbying. I think it's great. I think everyone will assume we're doing more hobbies than we are, and they will start talking to us about how great it is and inspiring it is that we're doing hobbies, and we'll say, yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. It's all that we're doing.
It's exactly why I keep a guitar that I never play in the background of all my work calls. So people think I'm like, oh, they're like, oh, that guy has like other shit going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it kind of gets us to. I guess we should tell everybody like what we're doing, why we're doing it. What are we doing? Well, we're guys and folks that are that have a wide variety of hobbies, and we just kind of wanted to talk about the process of hobbying. Whether that's you're painting miniatures, as we might find out later in this episode, working on cars, playing guitar, all that good stuff. There's different ways to approach it and different ways that it interacts with your life, and kind of wanted to discuss how people who don't professionalize their skills bring that into their life and what kind of fulfillment it brings them. Would you say that's kind of the goal there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we want to do is celebrate the things you do in your life that don't pay for your bills, that you're actively doing. They're things that you engage in and participate in and aren't just a consumer of, whether that be just shopping or watching Netflix or listening to music. What can you do in your own life over the past 2 years and a quarter? We've all struggled to figure out how to feel good, keep going, and things like that. And one of the things that I think you can celebrate that helps you learn about yourself and find ways to create new ways to learn about yourself and share things with others. And even at the most base level, occupy your time, occupy the free time that you have more of than you've ever had. In hobbies and celebrate that those can be things all the way from athletic and physically demanding things to calm indoor things to very expensive things like building a $20,000 sim racing rig to very cheap things like, I don't know, you could make things out of recycled garbage if you wanted to, and glue guns and do things very cheaply. So this is our first attempt, because we haven't stood a website up yet, to start a brand of hobby enthusiast perverts who are coming together as a community to talk about, maybe not specific hobbies only, but talk about just the act of self-love.
Yeah. What are you excited about? I think that's a great point, though. Like, you bring up the past 2 years, like, obviously that kind of brought like a lot of people into like, oh, what can I do with myself that isn't masturbate and watch Netflix?
Fine to do.
I love those two things, but you kind of brought up the point that it's like, I think over the pandemic we saw this kind of breakdown of consumerism in a lot of people's minds, and they really struggled with it. And I think that's why so many people, the classic like, I gotta get back to Applebee's and the movies and shit, because people didn't really have much to occupy themselves with that drove them. And I think a lot of people myself included, maybe not so much because I am a weirdo and I have always been a weirdo, but like I will not lie, I enjoyed the pandemic for about 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
outside the death and destruction, I mean, notwithstanding, but
getting laid off a month into the pandemic was awesome.
yeah. But it was very hard, I think, for a lot of people to adjust and figure out like like how can I occupy myself and not just kind of be even like as people come in, I remember knowing a lot of people who struggle with this, and I did, like when you kind of start turning 25 or so and you're like, I can't just keep going to the bar every day. Can't, like, work is not this self-realizing experience that I was told it was going to be. I'm not, I'm not an actor. I'm not a rock star. Like, a lot of that stuff, I think, kind of drives like, oh, like, well, maybe I can just be okay with just like having a fucking good time, and hanging out with people, or hanging out with myself. I think that's a big part of the growth and a big part of the kind of thing that we're kind of trying to dissect here. Is how do you get to that, and how do you find that place?
And I think that's an interesting thread through the piece of your, like, the quarter life crisis, which seems to be coming earlier and earlier for people now. That you get out of maybe you get out of college, or maybe you've just been by that point working for a decade, and you're like, oh shit, this is just it. This is what it is.
Yeah.
And and it was always something that was interesting to me, through studying psychology, is that, like, you're like, oh man, I don't remember that much from my late 20s. It's like, well, I mean, like, in your teens, like, everything is this novel experience. You can start to drive, you go on, you go on all dates in a different way, and you start doing weird activities, and you start experimenting with chemicals and drinking and all these things, and you go to college, or maybe you don't, and maybe you start going to somebody's apartment and partying more, and, like, just whatever it is, you have all these new experiences. You get your first apartment, you do all these things, and then at some point you stop having all these new things. And, like, so then what do you do to have new things? It's like, well, you try things. Like, you can try hobbies, and you can do these things, and they have communities, and there's progression, and there's that kind of same level of growth within each individual context, because it's all its own newness. And I think that's part of the excitement to me, is like getting from the newness to where you're in the community, and that's like part of the experience, and having that. But yeah, I mean, it's I think that's part of what I hope we can get to, is that for most people, I mean, I know it's not for everybody. I know some people we're immediately comfortable to start going back to bars again. But I think for most people, it's like they've lacked being in community spaces and having that kind of shared thing. And hopefully that's something that we can create some idea about, and removing the gatekeeping, and getting to where it's celebrating wherever people are at in their journey on this, and whatever they're interested in doing and learning about, and bring together people who just want to work on things and share them, and I don't know, eventually get together and make some shit.
Yeah. It's like, I worked at a makerspace in college, and it's just like kind of like that vibe of, I'm not really into making cosplay costumes. Like, it is interesting to see, like, the detail and the engagement, and like the learning that you've gone through, and like describing techniques. And I've always just been excited by that. People who are excited about shit. I always joke, my friends, it's like, we're all friends because you're constantly, we at least have a scheme or two going on, and it's like, that's what you need to have. You need to have a few schemes. You gotta, that's more than just like, oh, I wake up, I go to work, I wait until Friday, I go to the bar, and then that's it. And I wake up on Sunday and I feel really bad, and I don't, I didn't do anything, and I maybe get to do my laundry. And I've definitely been there. So but that's why we're here now, is to encourage each other not to devolve back into that.
And it's fine if you're there. You're gonna make it.
Yeah. So, Dag, what are you working on? I guess we should kind of introduce ourselves and our deep coping mechanisms.
Yeah. I mean,
acquired.
I mean, nobody else can see this, but you can see the pile of guitar pedals behind me.
There you go.
Stuff. So I just rearranged my room, which is now my hobby room, is now my office that I have to work in every day and do hobbies in. So I'm got to get this tackled and finish rearranging in here. I did put some shelves up, so I got the cameras have a place to live now. The wrestling figures have a place to live now. I'm buying myself more room to not put things on my dye table so I can do my tie-dye work. I have 9 chef hats that my friend Madeline picked up from the Salvation Army on Clybourne that say, so it's just white hats that say chef. So I need to dye those. I'm going to try the shaving cream method to dye them. So we'll see how that goes. I haven't done it yet, but I have to figure out how I'm going to do it to where it doesn't look like sugar cookies from a gentrification bakery. So I got to try to figure that out. Yeah. And then I have some wax work that I need to do for dye. So I need to do some batik dyes for a couple people. So going to get the dye lab back in operation this week.
There you go.
And hopefully get some dyes. And then I got to do some Steely Dan guitar practice so I can sync up with our good friend Colin on Friday and jam with him.
Yeah, so the tie-dye thing, I want to dive into that a little bit. With the tie-dyes, I know that we've kind of talked, Dag is much more into the jam band scene, but, I've always been kind of tangential to it. One thing I always kind of found a little off-putting about it is that it was a pseudo hobby. And it was really just going to the bars at the end of the day. And so, Dag, how did you kind of expand it? Because I think that's where you got into the dye-dyeing and stuff, right? How did that kind of work for you?
So
where you felt like you needed more?
Yeah, back in the day when I was more...
You're headier.
I was headier, yeah. I want to say more naive. Back when I was 16 and 17 and even 18 going into college, I had a hemp necklace and wore corduroy shorts and boat shoes before Sperry's topsiders were the move. I bought some at a Catholic rummage sale, and we were just we'd come into class wearing our Salvation Army sweaters and never be like, oh, those are the guys who smoke weed. And the first thing I think I dyed was I just had spilled grape juice on a white t-shirt, like an under tee. And then I was just like, I could just probably dye the rest of this in grape juice and coffee. And so it's stupid stuff like that, like natural dyes. But I never really was buying a lot of tie-dye at that point, or making any. And it wasn't really until the pandemic. I'm wearing one of the first pieces I made now. It looks terrible to me now. But I was just like, man, I'm stuck inside at my house. It's the middle of summer 2020. It's very hot. I don't have air conditioning in the back. I need tank tops. And I was like, I don't want some just plain tank tops. I'd want some designs. And I was like, well, instead of making those or buying those, I could probably make some. So I bought one of each Hanes, Fruit of the Loom, Gildan tank tops, and then looked up how to get dye, and then bought Procyon dyes, and looked at some YouTube videos. Mr. Tie-Dye has great videos if you ever just want to start figuring out how to do things. And I just consumed Mr. Tie-Dye videos for months of how do you make a mandala? How do you make a star? How do you fold things? And went out in the backyard, and Claire and I dyed a couple pieces, and that was the start from there. And then I was just like, hey, I wonder if I could go and make a stencil of an alien's face and see if I could actually do it. And so I did one test run of a shirt that was an alien that I tied off, and then did a rainbow on the outside of, and ended up looking really great. And so I gave it to Carl, Totally Moon on Twitter. If anybody knows Carl, Carl is a visitor from the cosmos to Earth. And I couldn't think of a better place for it to go, so I just gave it to Carl.
Yeah.
But then after I shared it, like, I started getting DMs where people were like, "Hey, can you make this?" And I ended up like making 6 of them, and it took me a lot of time because I had no process for doing it. I like did different colors for everybody else, and it ended up being a super stressful headache to get them all done.
So you weren't just you didn't get pulled into the lot dies. You weren't like I'm gonna be selling these to pay for my tickets.
No, because and mostly because the pandemic has sort of tapered off that ability. Like so like last weekend was Summer Camp Festival, and back in my hometown, which is where I got into the jam scene and stuff like that, and it very much influenced folks back home from going to just listening to like Dave and OAR to listening to Fish and Humphreys and Mo and different jam bands, and pushing that even harder than a couple guys who discovered weed in high school would have. And yeah, so like from there, it's like I in my head could have envisioned like going back home for the weekend, hanging out with my mom, and then going to the festival with a backpack full of tie-dyes and just walking around and selling them to people. But I haven't done that yet. It's something I'd like to do at some point, just because I think it'd be fun. But I typically, since I've been working commission-based, when I make stuff for other people, I haven't like built up a backlog of things I could just take somewhere.
Right. Well, I guess I guess my main hobby, I guess at this point, is cars, because I am now in my 30s and have like a stable job and a house and things like that. Because I never really had a car until I moved to North Carolina. But I was really big into bikes. I was huge into bikes.
Like
that was the first
GTs?
thing. No, not those. Like bicycles.
Yeah, like a GT.
Oh, yeah. I got
GT
you.
was like GT was like the bike in Peoria where like there would be a kid who would be trying to like sell you one for $200, but he like definitely stole it.
Yeah. So I got into that, and that was like the first time it really opened my eyes to like how you could just like not have to do everything people tell you that you have to do to survive in this world. Because like I had a frame that I got for like $200 and put together as a single speed, which is a lot easier to ride in Illinois.
It's flat, if you don't know.
Yeah, and I went everywhere on it. Like I did not own a car for a very long time. So so I kind of like learned, like how parts work and bolts and that shit. So
he's like cycling failed.
What's up?
You cycling failed.
Yeah.
You went from being a car abolitionist to a car pervert.
Well, I really get a lot of shit for that, actually, from a lot of people who knew me from a long time ago. So
the only people who should have cars are perverts. That's our official stance.
So this is not to say I think that we need to continue having cars as anything more than like what the equivalent of people who own horses. That should be about what your car should be. But so I kind of always have worked on my own bike and kind of customized it a bit and used it a lot. But then, like Dag is saying, during the pandemic, I also kind of was like, well, it's always been a dream of mine to know how to work on a car. They've been very mystical to me. There's always something that I never understood how it worked. And a buddy of mine that I worked with was really into cars, and I asked him, I was like, oh, like you've probably been doing this like forever, right? And he's like, no, I taught myself like in my 30s, and I bought a Miata. And so that was probably 2 years before this. And So I was like, well, maybe I'll buy a Miata someday because, like, I always love driving, even though I didn't have a car. And so I bought a Miata finally, and I've basically just begun process. There's nothing wrong with it. I have created all of the issues that are wrong with the car now, by removing things, putting things that were like not really designed for the car in it. And I started small. I started with just changing the spark plugs and put a new dash head unit in so I could use my Google Maps, and just kept getting bigger and bigger. Like I did my shocks and springs. I changed them to like adjustable stuff. So because I raced my car so much that I obviously needed really tunable suspension components.
You have to be able to take the extensive curbing at VIR.
Exactly. So I started doing that, and I took it apart, and like recently, I put a supercharger on it, which is probably the biggest modification that I made, and it's fucking nuts. I haven't gotten to drive it yet, but when I did that, that was the first project I did where I was really like, wow, like you really do know some stuff. Like you have grown a lot. Like I've had it about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit less than a year and a half, and like nothing in the install caught me off guard. I wasn't like unsure of what any of the parts were. I wasn't sure like what I was taking off, like where it needed to go, like what it did, like everything. I knew all of it. I knew all of them, and that was a lot too. Is like so like after I bought the Miata, my wife obviously got really jealous that I had a cool car now, so then she had to buy one, and she bought this like this Japanese market 4x4 that's like based on the Samurai.
How did she determine that's what she wanted?
I don't know, man. She wanted a Wrangler for a while, and I was like, well, like that's a lot of car for a lot of money, and it's like you're like gonna have a pavement princess, and it's like you should find something different. And I kept telling her, I was like, like we should try and find like a tracker. Like that's what you want. You want something that's a convertible top and like a little bit of a utility vehicle.
Yeah.
So she had kind of been like looking for them, and she found this car, and I'm like, well, like just so you know, like this is gonna be like an advanced level project to own, and like, and it's low mileage, so a lot of the stuff isn't bad on it. That would be like a true headache, but it certainly really was a lot of stuff that like had I not gone through just doing all this on the Miata when it wasn't broken, and like learning about, and then I also bought a 78 Cadillac and learned a lot of this stuff, like how to like kind of have more generic skills. Like when you're looking at a car, you're like, well, like I don't know exactly how they put that piece on for these models of cars, but I know it has to be there, and I know what it would vaguely look like. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think without that kind of level that I'd gotten to, like I would have been like, we have to sell this car. Like this fucking thing is a nightmare.
Did you have any? I know, like in Chillicothe, we had like a fair amount of vocational classes. We did like small engines, and then we did like auto repair.
Yeah. And, so we did have that.
I was the TA for small engines when I was a senior, which was just
we did have that, and they told me that class is for dumb people.
Well,
that's what my counselor told me. They pulled me in and they said, you are not allowed to take that class because it is for dumb people. And
I didn't know they were that classist on the east side of the Illinois River.
Well, yes, they are. This was also, in the 2000s. It was, it was a different time back then. But yeah, that's literally what they told me.
Wow.
And so that's kind of always carried with me, and it's been like something. It's like, well, I understand how math works. I don't understand how a fucking car works. Mm-hmm. Like, can you, like, this would have been interesting to me.
The one I wish I would have taken was electronics.
I still don't know how electricity works. I didn't take
that, and yeah, exactly. That's something I might like. Making guitar pedals and doing like wiring on the guitars is something I'll probably do for this project, just because it's something to do and it's something I need to have done. But at the same time, like I pull I pull up wiring diagrams. And I'm just like, I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I've learned a little bit about that with the cars, like especially the Cadillac. Being so old, it was like a lot of like tracing wires, but like they weren't really like I still don't really understand like why electricity goes where it does and things like that. Like why you put a resistor and like all that shit. I'm like, even when I'm taking my battery off, I still freak out that I'm gonna like be electrocuted.
Oh, come on.
Dude, it's just like it's a mystical force to me, and
when you're really a garage 3 beer mechanic is when you're like, oh, I think that solenoid's dead on the starter, and then you're jumping it with like a screwdriver. Like that's always all the old boys in like the motorcycle shop, so it's like my family had the motorcycle shop, and so like when you worked the parts counter, which is what I did for most of the time I worked there, you're also involved in not officially giving repair advice.
Right.
Because you're looking up schematics, and it's like one thing for me to be like, look, if you're gonna go into that crankcase, you're gonna tear up the gasket, because I can see by the way you sign your signature that you're not you're not tactile. So you're gonna tear this up, and you're gonna want to replace all these O-rings because like otherwise you're screwing around. And they're like, why does that O-ring cost $5? It's like because it's from Honda. I really don't know what you want, man. I'm sorry. But it's like they're like, well, I think it's that starter solenoid because I crossed a screwdriver across it and it fired up. And you're like, hell yeah, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is the one thing. Like I will say, if you're getting into cars, it is very intimidating because they're very expensive. Like it's probably one of the most expensive things you've ever bought in your life, other than if you own a house. And it also can kill you. Like I mean, if you like don't install stuff correctly, like yes, you can die. But I also remember, like you're saying, when I'm working on the car, you remember it's just car parts. It all makes sense. It's all supposed to fit together somehow. And B, think about the people who have worked on their cars. Like, I'm not trying to be like the school counselor in Bloomington, Illinois, but like you definitely have seen some stuff out there that you're like, wow, like how is that guy not dead yet? And you're like, so because I have the thought in my head, like, I don't want to die, you'll probably be, like, a little bit in front of that guy, at least.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
he's not dead. So,
That's true. I mean, I think now of the, I think that as much as, like, the old retired guy, car show guy exists in people's mind, like, I think there's a lot of people who don't see or think about the 22-year-old car tuners, like
right.
the new future of young guy who like the thing like like Jackson shared with like or maybe you have off of like Facebook of like kids who are driving like 20 miles both ways because they have to get like specific mixtures of fuels to like meet their whatever their tune is, and it's on like a Chevy Cobalt, and you're like, who would do that? And you're like, the guy who can only afford a Chevy Cobalt.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing that really sucks about cars is not that they were ever really that cheap, but have become a lot more expensive in the past few years.
Sure, I've got a poster.
Taken a lot of the fun out of it.
I've got a poster here that from my family's motorcycle shop, and the date is let's see, 1985, September 24th. How much do you think that a Ninja 600 Kawasaki is in September of 1985?
Like maybe $1,200.
It was $3,299 in 1985. In the 70s, your like top of the line bikes are like between $1,500 and like $2,500. So like as a 19-year-old guy, you get out of high school, or gal, whatever you want. You get out of high school and you like go to the factory and you start working shifts, and maybe you're union, and you can go and you can buy a bike. And now they start at $9,999, and you don't have any credit score.
Yeah, I mean, even just like a lot of the stuff that people think of like as being kind of the cars you work on. Like everybody has seen the tuned Civics and the these like goofy little old Japanese cars that people have done crazy stuff to, and like make them really loud and kind of fast. Not really fast, but a little bit faster. Certainly louder. And like where a lot of people cut their teeth before they buy a real car, and kind of don't go so bonkers on that one. Um, those cars like don't exist as much anymore because like there's just no car you can buy for like $2,000 that like still runs, and you could dump a little bit of money into just to learn on. And yeah, I think that's a lot of hobbies is like people now, like this people who make the stuff or whatever, like know that it's better to keep like a more restricted market on things. And it's just harder to have like a cheap hobby because like people who like to like archive video games or like build custom stuff for those, and all that stuff becomes more expensive because like whatever reason. And yeah, it is really sad entry point, I think, for a lot of like things that used to be like maybe not cheap. Like cars were never cheap, but it was like you could have a car that wasn't very reliable that you could like kind of learn to work on your reliable car and then end up saving a lot of money in the long run. Because I mean, I very rarely ever pay for a mechanic now after a year of learning, and I mean that saves you at least twice the cost of everything. Like everything to install is just twice as much.
Yeah,
like if you're paying someone else to do it.
Your labor is going to start at $100 an hour and go up from there. And anything that you want to have done, I mean, if you want to have somebody touch your fuel tank, they need to take off X number of panels to even get to it. So you're paying for work that isn't even the work that you're hoping to have done because it costs somebody time to do it.
Right.
And to get through that. But yeah, I think that's like obviously, on the expensive end where you either have to learn by design to either one, have the thing function, or two, just like to mitigate cost, to get that back down.
But even like,
and also you have to have some
pedals.
Space. You have to have the space to keep a car. Because it's just like
But even like you bring up building guitar pedals, like that's gotten so much more expensive, and it's just like it kind of sucks that I feel like a lot of people are now like it's harder for you to want to be the hobbyist that works on your own stuff, like partially to save money. Like now you have to be a hobbyist because you want to do it, like as opposed to like that's a good way to save a little bit of money and learn how things work and just feel a little bit of pride that I did it. Like, and now it's like they're like, oh, we're gonna charge you for that.
Well, and so I think that's the thing with like it's like I studied autonomy, and the theory or framework we worked with them and we approached it was self-determination theory, and it's basically describing the why people do behaviors and how they keep engaging in them. And so people are using that to look at like education, like how do you help kids study and learn. But you can use it in our lab. We used it for exercise, like how do you get people to behave in these healthy behaviors and continue to do these healthy behaviors so that they don't have shitty hearts and feel bad and feel tired all the time. And so like it basically though runs from all the way from like I don't want to do this activity at all, and you can think of that as like doing the dishes. Like I don't want to do the dishes. Like you're not going to do the dishes if you don't want to do the dishes. But then you move up and it's like, oh, and then but what if your significant other or your roommate told you if you don't do the dishes, you're getting kicked out? It's like, well, then now I have a reason to do the dishes. But as soon as they stop threatening me, I'm not doing the dishes. But then you can start doing more internalized things. And that's the whole goal, is internalizing these activities. And like from there, it's just like, well, maybe I have a goal to not let the dishes sit for more than 2 days. Like now you're doing the dishes every 2 days, and that's a goal that you have. But then it could be I want to have the dishes done before my friends come over. And then what happens? You start sticking dishes in the cabinets or whatever. But basically it just moves on until you either start having an identity as somebody who has a clean kitchen, and that's part of who you are, or you just realize, I actually enjoy that after being on a computer and looking at screens all day, every day for the past decade, it's nice to just put my hands in soapy water that's warm for 15 minutes. and I actually just enjoy doing that. Or maybe I'm finding new techniques for how to clean dishes the right way, or things like that. And so I think that's to me where it's just like you have so much through these different hobbies where like once you become a car pervert, like you're fixing things because it's embarrassing to go and take your car in to get repaired when all your other friends are doing brake drums themselves.
Right.
Or learning about how the brake drum works is really exciting to you, or finding new techniques for how to bore a cylinder is fun. I still can't believe that that our buddy John has just ported his own heads on his Volvo after like never having a car before. Like he is learning about processes that are specialty car processes. Like he's not just making his car run, he's like eking out fractions of performance out of his car that's older than him.
I think that's kind of the trade-off, I guess, in hobbies in 2022, is that yes, while sometimes they're more expensive or inaccessible in a lot of ways, the amount of information that you can get on how to do something is fucking unreal at this point. I mean, I can't imagine ever having figured out how to work on a car in the bad old days when like you had to go to the library and like find service manuals for stuff, and you get to a point where like have to like order stuff without the internet. Like
the day before I moved to Chicago from downstate, my right window on my Honda Element failed. So just like the day before going to the big city as a downstate guy, it's just like now I don't have a window that closes. Like can't be in the city with a window that doesn't close. Somebody will steal all my valuables from my Honda Element. So I took that one to the shop, got it repaired at the shop, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. Cost what it cost. But then a couple years later, the left window went because like why wouldn't it? It's just that regulator is going to be tired. And that time I was just like, you know what? Fuck that. Like the AutoZone up the street has a window regulator for this car. There's a YouTube video that's 10 minutes long of a guy who looks like John Popper from Blues Traveler. Not even joking. He even had like a hat on. And he's just like 10 minutes. Here's how you take apart a, first generation Honda Element door panel and replace the window regulator. And I did it on the side of the street in the rat crap. And it was easy. It took me half an hour. Just watch the video. It's just shit.
I think the other thing too is, and I know the guy. So like, there's a video channel called Donut Media that's like kind of like millennial car guys. And they do a series on having what is owning a project car like, which project car generally means like one that you're modifying and probably has stuff wrong with it, and you're trying to restore it to glory or whatever. And they talk about in it. About how like when you get into stuff like that, like working on cars, or even like going back to me working on bikes, it opens up your brain and like your way of thinking to being like, oh, now I have like a bit of autonomy in my life where, oh, my fucking washing machine broke. Like it probably works about the same way. Like there's parts, they were put there on purpose. It's probably held together with 10mm bolts if it's Japanese. And like I could probably find if it's leaking, that means water is going to be coming out from somewhere. So I can find that piece, go take it to a fucking store or whatever, or look online and buy it and put it on. And I think that that's a lot of what I get from hobbies.
Yeah.
Is that it gives you this like kind of more confidence to be able to say, I can figure out other things now. Like I can figure out the harmonica. I can play the harmonica, and I approach it the same way. I can figure out how to play the banjo. I can learn to drive my car like a race car driver does. And it does kind of suck because I feel like the trade-off, it has been you aren't as active in like a community of people whose face you know what they look like, which is part of the reason why, I wanted to try and get into hobbies is because I moved to a new place and I don't know anybody. And it's like, well, like maybe if I get into some stuff, like I'll meet people. and that's kind of the trade-off. Is like now I feel like a lot of people into hobbies are kind of siloed into, oh, like you only talk about that in the forums or whatever. Not to say I haven't met people eventually, but you know, like it's kind of both the gift and the curse of the internet is that like that now you have both the confidence and the ability to figure out like anything mechanical that is in your house or your apartment or your bike or whatever. But you know, it is like harder to feel engaged in like an actual community.
Should we roll that thought into the our hobby meditation of the week?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, so so something we want to kind of do is you know, besides obviously jackjaw and ramble about ourselves, is we kind of want to toy with different aspects of the philosophy and the ups and downs of hobby living and hobby lifestyle. Like there are certain things, you know, like being able to have an approach where you can fix things is great because it eliminates a barrier to resolving the problems. You know, if anybody's read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, it's like, you know, he's going crazy about his friend who has a leaky faucet that he never fixes. Like, how do you become the person who fixes the leaky faucet instead of saying, oh, hey, sorry, that cabinet on that door doesn't close right? Like, well, there's like, how do you get to where you can fix it? What do you need?
And like, be clear, when you have a project car, you learn to just accept the leaky faucet sometimes.
Absolutely. That's one of the most popular like TikTok, Instagram reel, like audio clips is just like, oh, she's good as the day she came off the lot, and just like, does it rattle like a bucket of bolts? It's like, oh yeah. Like it's just, I was
gonna say, believe me, trying to sell the Cadillac, I realized that I have been ignoring the leaky faucet to some people. You know.
Yeah. You're nobody's worried about the tolerances on the Vibes boat. But at the same time, it's like, so there are these different things, right? And like one piece of this is the ability to then intuit, because I have done these unrelated projects, I should be able to do anything. And I'm the master for being able to do anything. And then the other is like taking this level of like perfectionism, where you're afraid to fail because you don't actually know what you're doing. And you're kind of building up the requirements of the task to the point that you're keeping yourself from actually enjoying it, right? Like at the end of the day, like even if you have to change your brakes, which sucks, like you have to find some way to enjoy doing it, or at least to have it not be this huge burden. And I think that's something that I specifically feel like I see a lot, is this kind of like this fear of doing the thing. Like, what if I don't do it well enough? What if, well, you know, I could do it this week, but like I haven't cleaned the garage all the way out, so I can't do it. Or, you know, I'm a little bit tired today. Like like being honest, I think it's important to be honest with yourself where those barriers are real and where you're actually inventing that fear of failure, and trying to use your autonomy and your sense of control to control all these factors that aren't actually related to the outcomes you're looking at, right?
Right.
Like something I always think about is like when it comes to like things I've gotten into, like making cocktails, cooking, making tie-dye, whatever it is, by simply doing it and having a process by which you're trying to learn these new skills and figure things out, you're getting to a point where other people, you know, probably aren't. Right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
Like you might make ribs in your smoker that are middling. They're mid. The ribs are mid to you. But you have your friend over who only gets ribs from the Golden Corral. And they're like, oh my God, these are some of the best ribs I've ever had.
Right.
Like it's that there's like that level of comparison just from where you get in your headspace.
I think you see it a lot. Like, I feel like that's a really classic music, like especially guitar, electric guitar. Huge thing in electric guitar, where they call it gear acquisition syndrome, where you become so obsessed with crafting your tone instead of actually learning to play your guitar correctly. And that comes up in a lot of stuff, and I think that's another word. Talking about the internet and its impact on hobbies, that has been the biggest negative influence. I think is that people see this whole breadth of stuff you can get for the hobby, and then the hobby becomes buying the stuff for the hobby as opposed to doing the hobby. And it's definitely very tempting, and it goes back to our earlier conversation about just like being American or whatever, living under capitalism. Like, we have been just so trained to be consumers, and that's how you engage with shit. And it's like I don't want to say it's like a direct one-to-one, but it's certainly like it certainly is like people get this kind of like this like reward, like, oh, I bought the vibe pedal, so that's like basically I play like Jimi Hendrix. I'm closer to playing like Jimi Hendrix than if I had just practiced.
I have the fuzz face. That's the original circuitry.
Yeah. People get so fucking obsessed with it. So like guitars,
my thing right now I'm thinking of is like, I don't have really good needle tip bottle applicators for tie-dye. And when you do like mandalas or things where you have, I mean, no one else can see this, but you can see this. Like, once you get stuff like this, right, where you've got these little nubs, like it's difficult to dye those without having a lot of precision about how much dye is going into them. But at the same time, I could do that with what I have by working very carefully and slowly. I just don't like working that way. like I more so like, rather than like deadly accuracy in my tie-dye, I like the idea of like, this is an expressive thing that you should do a little bit. I mean, you don't have to be high. You can do it sober, but like, you should be listening. You should be listening. Like, even if you're sober, you should be like listening to a show, and it should feel like you're, drawing energy out of yourself. Like, it's an active process. You're literally spreading color on blank canvases. And I think that part of the magic to me, when I get too worried about whether or not things turned out the way I wanted, is it's like the die will go where the die wants to go. And that's like, it's kind of an excuse, but it's also just like that. Let the universe take some character in there. Like, some of the things that are unexpected are the best things that you can have come out. And you can't control it anyway. And if it didn't turn out the way you wanted, just make another one. Like it's or figure out why it went that way. And I think that's where you get to being a real hobbyist, when you do a project, and not that you beat yourself up about it, but that you have things you want to do differently the next time. That's always my tell of like when you realize you're on a hobby. Because like,
I was just talking about that with my harmonica teacher. He's like, your temptation is like, when we're practicing, and he was talking about practice, and he's like you don't want to do it because it's boring and it sucks, and then but you're doing the more expressive forms of playing, and you realize that there's things that you're not doing right. And if you do want, like, that's what I think a lot of people stop their hobbies or whatever. It's like they get past the point where it's like, okay, like for instance, like playing harmonica. It's like, I can go to a blues jam, and like I can play fine, and people like it and shit. But like, I knew little things that I didn't do. But it wasn't. But learning that first part where I was like, oh, like I don't know how to play harmonica at all, to like being able to survive with other people and shit. Obviously, that was much more exciting than now when I have to go and play scales and shit.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
He was talking about, he's like, you really just need to find little things that you can digest and work on them a little bit and find results there, and you'll still get it. Like, and then you can still keep doing the part that you enjoy, and grow so much better if you're saying, not beating yourself. It's a very delicate line.
Yeah.
Like being like, I don't beat myself up about it, and I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. It's like you have to find something wrong, else you won't grow anymore.
I think you have to have the perfectionism is something to use as inspiration to do the things when they suck. But you also have to remember, I think, to be mindful, right? Like, why did the colors on this die turn out poorly? It's just like, well, because I let that bottle of dye sit for a week on my counter. And I decided to use it, even though I knew it was probably close to being bad. And it was a little bit dull. And that's what it is. And it's like you can sit and beat yourself up about it, or you can just be like, well, I need to be more careful with that. I need to be better about that.
They're still pretty cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know some things that I could do better, and maybe in 2 years I'll think this thing looks like or sounds like shit, or, you know, but it's like, well, that's all part of the process. Is like, I think it's about like feeling good about what you're doing when you do it, and then enough that you can keep going, and then like later you can be like, oh, like I was a fucking joker, like like I was just a total joker, dude. Like, what was I thinking that this was good? Well, that's fine. Later, later, you can look back on way later and be like, oh, what a joker I was. But you know, like, and I don't even think, you know, I think you do even have to kind of detach yourself from this like linear process mindset and just be like, oh, I'm just enjoying like figuring something new out.
Yeah.
Like that's what you should, like, I feel like really need to focus on. It's like, okay, well, like if I like this thing, and so then I get engaged in it, and then once I've learned it, like, you know, that they say like that learning curve, you know, is like kind of an exponential curve. Like you learn like a shitload of stuff at the beginning, and then it becomes all refinement.
Yep.
And like, you know, like you just have to be able to take those like little things. It's like, oh, like this is really what separates like people who know what they're doing from like people who don't. And that's just as big of a gain as it is to just be able to play, or to be able to tie-dye a shirt, or to be able to change your shocks on your car.
So I mean, I think the thing is like one of the ways you can self-defeat is by looking at those chores, practicing, cleaning things up, preparing things. Like for me, for dye work, I have to clean all the bottles out, clean all the jars I mix dye out. I have to wash the shirts. I have to tie the shirts.
Reminded me why I gave up brewing beer.
And this is less sterilization needed, you know. But then I have to mix the dye, and if it's thickened dye, I have to let it sit for 3 hours so that it can like settle down, and thicken up. And so it's like that can be in and of itself. I can be like, man, I want to bang a dye out, and I have a process by which I can do that now, because I learned how to use the hot water irrigation technique that I think Surreal Pencil is his handle on Instagram. But I learned the process by which this guy was using like medical grade diastolic pumps, because it rubs the wheel on the tube in a way that it pumps, instead of like the fluid going into the pump, because you have chemicals in there and it would all gunk up. So he started for himself using this type of medical pump and a crock pot to do hot water irrigation tie-dye, which is basically like an ice dye, but you're just running hot alkaline soda ash over the top. And I didn't want to do that, but what I figured out is that I could use my sous vide, which I already have, and I could just put bottles of soda ash into my sous vide tank, and then I could do that process myself. So if I really was like, I want to produce a shirt within 20 minutes, I can do it now, because I unlocked that process for myself, and I can do that. But if I want to do my other stuff, I need to be like, okay, I need to like find ways to not let these be barriers, and just be like, well, I might not be able to make shirts today, but I can do these chores for myself. I can get these things out of my way.
Yeah.
I can be more intentional about like, hey, when I am playing some stupid tap game on my phone, or trying to figure out why this person is getting yelled at by everybody on Twitter, I could just be like rinsing bottles out in the sink. Yeah. And it takes 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's like, you know, talking about too, like guys who like when you get into it and you're like watching all these videos, and like these people just like seem like so untenably genius about like what they're doing. You have to like realize too that like basically everything they know, they went through the same thing.
Yeah.
And they might have like invented one extra step. Like that's really how all of life works. And I think that's intimidating too. I think a lot of people get really intimidated. Sure. Like, I can never be that smart. It's like, well, I mean, to be honest, like most people who know anything about anything, they don't really know anything. They're just going off what other people told them. Like, I mean, You know, like it's the classic standing on shoulders of giants stuff. You know, like we all are. Like none of us really came up with anything that original. Like maybe our special combination is individual. I think that's certainly true.
You learn that whenever you'd search like, oh, I came up with this great pun, and then you go search it on Twitter, and every 20 follower account posted it in 2013 because you didn't invent it. Yeah. It's like we only have so many thoughts in our heads. But something that my psych professor said, my social psychology professor in undergrad, Tony Herman, he said he was like one day in class, which is cool. He was like, like I'm not any smarter than anybody in this room. Like I don't have more aptitude. I have studied this specific area of expertise for 20 years. For 20 years, I've been in an academic setting, reading articles and doing research and talking to people about these topics. So I know a lot about them. And in the same way, people that are obsessed with these topics, even in short periods of time, I mean, like, I don't like talking about Gladwell anymore because he thinks Sandusky was fine and nobody's fault. But the 10,000 hours thing, like you can get to where you have the amount of immersion that somebody would have had in the 70s over years from doing work in people's garages or finding a service manual or things like that, whatever it is. Like we could go and you could consume all of the basic knowledge from Reddit within a matter of hours. You can know the basic requirements of any level of thing, and then from there, it's actually doing physical engagement with that thing and understanding how it works for you and getting there. So, like the amount that we can go is on our own is very quick, especially compared to the past. But if you ever feel like you're the genius and you've invented something nobody else did, you might need to check because you're either doing something wrong or you're overlooking the difficulty or the requirements, or you're just like inventing new problems. And again, at that point, it is, I mean, bring it back and check in. Like, well, am I doing what needs to be done to get this done? Like, is this an actual requirement? Because there are things where if you can, like, it doesn't matter if I mix my dyes the same way every time or not. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what that should look like but me. But I don't want to short anybody when I make them something. So like, what do I need to do to get the work done and do it the right way and also enjoy it at the end of the day? And if somebody's paying me for it, they need to enjoy it too. And where am I just like becoming crazy? And for some people, the hobby might be just inventing those little interlude pieces and the little interstitials. But at that point, get a job in operations. If you want to do that, go work in a warehouse and work in logistics where a couple seconds per item is huge money for the business, right? Like, don't do that in your own life. Don't do Six Sigma in your own life. The people at Motorola who came up with Six Sigma should be in hell. It's ruined everybody's lives, and it's part of why the labor force sucks ass. But don't do that to yourself. Like, these are your things to enjoy, and that's the thing for me is like doing my chores to get my dye stuff ready. They shouldn't be chores. Like that's work that I'm doing. It's like investing time to allow myself to feel joy and excitement and things that I can share with other people. And I have to break that up into making it its own Zen practice of like, this is when I do this practice. I clean these things up, and that's my meditation to prep to do the work and to enjoy that work.
Yeah, that's I think that's a good place to lead into our interview that we have coming. Yeah. So we are going to cut to our good friend Jane from the Batting Around podcast, and we're going to talk to her a little bit about her hobbies. So why don't we cut to that? All right, we are now here with Jane of the Batting Around podcast. How are you, Jane?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Adam.
Of course, as a legendary hobby pervert poster for a while there, we had to kick off the podcast with someone who has kind of, you kind of very deliberately went into hobbies for a minute there.
Oh, I mean, I very much still am, but I'm one of the dilettantes of all time. Like, I switch around on my hobbies quite a bit. What you're referring to is when I was doing, like, miniature painting and Warhammer 40K stuff. And I plan on getting back into that, but the problem was that I only liked doing it in my garage, and so when it got cold, I couldn't really do that. But now that it's warm again, I want to start doing that again. But like, I don't know, I always have some sort of hobby going. Recently got sucked back into fucking Magic the Gathering, and that's been taking up a bunch of time and money. I post about that a little bit now, but yeah, the hobby streak and the Warhammer posts, like I hope will come back.
So like,
yeah, like, oh, go ahead, Jack.
I was just gonna say, so like, I think the thing, like the 100 days of hobby or the hobby streak thing. I mean, I think that was like an interesting thing to us, just because I mean, I would assume for most people, I know it's definitely for me, like I have done any number of hobbies for 2 weeks to months on end, and then it kind of falls off. And it's simple things like I'm not going to go reverse dye a t-shirt by boiling it in my yard if it's 6 degrees. Like I'm not going to do that. And so there are things that are actual barriers, and there are things where it's just like, you know, things just stop being fun for a minute.
Absolutely.
So like actually making sure that you're and having some sort of drive to do it every day. I mean, I think is something where it's like, you know, like what did you maybe learn out of that process of handling it that way, or like did it help, or was it?
Yeah, the hobby streak definitely helped a lot. The idea behind it, like I didn't make that up. I became familiar with it from a miniature painting YouTuber that I really like named Dana Howell, and she's on like something like day 1300 of her hobby streak. And like she like cut her hand open so bad that it like, you know, like hit a tendon, and she had to go to the hospital and stuff, and she still was back later that day like doing something with one hand. And so like, I don't know, that's kind of inspiring, but I like the hobby streak thing. Like it makes you do it for at least a half an hour every day, because it takes about 20 minutes or so to like really get into the zone on something, to enter that flow state that they call it. And I really like the hobby streak because it was kind of like, it's almost like an accountability thing. It's like, I mean, I don't owe any of you freaks Warhammer posts, but I don't know, I like the validation that I get from it. I like the dopamine hits of the faves on you know, and seeing the numbers go up on Twitter and stuff. But I don't know, and like hitting those numbers every day, making the posts, like I don't know, I just really like that. And I like showing the stuff off that I was making too. It was like I was making some progress, and I wanted to show people like, hey, check out this cool thing that I just made.
And you ended up 3D printing your own, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where I started with the Warhammer stuff. I wanted to do it for a long time, but it's just like a very intimidating hobby. It's like it's expensive.
And it can be very expensive, yeah.
Yeah, it's expensive. The painting like has quite a learning curve on it. I had a very, very good painter and artist teach me how to do it and get me started, which was good. But I started it because of the 3D printing. I was like, I saw like a sale on them. I always thought that was really cool, and I wanted it for D&D initially. I wanted to like build out terrain and miniatures for that, because they're way more expensive nowadays than when I started playing. And I was like, shit, I want to like a lot of miniatures, you know, and I don't want to pay, you know, $5 to $10 for each of these. So I'll just get a 3D printer, and that thing is like a whole hobby in and of itself.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's like a ton of work to. I mean, it's not like really hard to do once you get going on it, but like, I mean, I spent a lot of time in the software figuring out how to set all of that stuff up and, you know, get all the settings dialed in and shit. But it's, you know, that was a whole thing of itself. And then when I got that, I was just like, shit, I can print a whole Warhammer army. And so the cost of the 3D printer stuff and my first bit of paint that I got was like $300. And that's a fraction of a Warhammer army. Right. So it's like, cool, I'll just do that. And I printed like pretty much my entire first army that I made.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Like, how did you feel about like, you know, because I guess like there's, you know, describing the way that Warhammer works, it's like, yeah, you can buy a lot of this stuff already made, but not painted, obviously. And that's a big part of it. I don't really know that much, but I've definitely seen some of the sets, and they're really intricate and stuff. And it's like, how did you feel about like being able to kind of like subvert the whole kind of DRM lock on Warhammer, which is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you
I mean,
spend a shitload of money to
Right.
play.
Yeah, when are you gonna
That's
start
the-
printing your own Magic cards?
that's very, very much a thing too.
Really?
Oh yeah. Proxies are very, very much a thing. But with the Warhammer printing the Warhammer army, I mean, I was just like, damn, this does feel cool. Like I am just making sure that Games Workshop, a company that already has plenty of money and is constantly pissing off its customer base, gets a little bit less money from me. No, I've gone out and bought plenty of stuff from them. After
Some of those
that,
are just so sick,
I'm not
like-
being that much of a rebel, really. But I mean, I thought it was really, but I did really like that aspect of it, and I also liked that I wasn't just making direct copies of their miniatures. It was other stuff that other people had made, which is another cool aspect of it, like another cool little aspect of like the 3D printed like Warhammer community. And I made my Imperial Guard, and instead of them looking like the kind of Starship Troopers looking guys that are the normal Imperial Guardsmen, mine kind of look like fucking like Stalingrad guys. They got the long coats and and little like PPSH looking las rifles and stuff. Is cool. So like I don't know, there's like a ton of customization to it that I thought was really, really cool.
Yeah, it makes sense in a community where part of it is being creative and doing
Totally.
that level of crafting that it would be very easy for them to just take it to the next level, given what that is.
Yeah,
Where
there
that is.
are tons of sites out there. There's a ton of Patreons and like paid for stuff too, where 3D artists make their own. They don't call them "this is a space marine." They're like, "This is a big space guy."
Yeah.
They have whole Patreons out there of that stuff where you download the STL files to make your own for whatever kind of army you're playing that you want to proxy up with those 3D printed versions.
So have you like just talking about that kind of level? Is like, have you ever felt like how have you felt about the siren's call of monetizing your hobby, and like how have you kept it separate? Have you thought about monetizing it? Like how has that worked? Because obviously everybody's like, oh, like I could turn this into something,
right?
And then it would be free.
I've had a couple people ask me if I would paint them miniatures or like print and paint their D&D figure or something like that, and that's one that I like. I'll do that for like friends and stuff for sure. There are tons of people that do that. They call it commission painters, who are way better at it than me. Like I'm okay at it for somebody who is doing it for a couple months, but there are people who are way, way better at it, and I'm like I kind of I would feel bad taking that money from them. But so I don't know. I don't really want to do it with that, and sitting down to paint is already such a time commitment that I want to be painting my own stuff if I'm going to be doing that. Like I just started going back to school. I have, a ton of other stuff that's going on. I don't want to do commission painting either, taking up some of that free time. And I've already started monetizing my fucking baseball podcast. And that's so like I've already kind of done that with one hobby already. I don't want to do it. Like, that video of the woman sitting in her garage smoking a cigarette, and she's like, I hate my fucking Lizard's Instagram account. Every day I have to make a post on this Instagram account, and it's my sole source of income. It's like, yeah, like I am at risk of that being my baseball podcast, so I don't want to do that with even more things here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a trap. It from the level of putting yourself in the position to potentially doing customer service on your hobby, where people are like, hey, this wasn't exactly the like blue that I was looking for, and you're just
do you know how stupid I would feel if like somebody paid me $100 or something to paint up their miniature, and I gave it to them and they didn't like it, and they have just this dumb little piece of plastic, like, yep, sorry, well, what the fuck do you want me to do about it?
Yeah,
not redoing that.
Most people I know producing stuff that they're selling, it's just like, look, I lost money making this for you.
Yeah.
Between my own labor and my material costs, like most of my friends aren't charging what they deserve, really, for their time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that happens with artists, where they're typically not super good with the whole money thing. So they end up doing that like a lot. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you did have somebody who was like a very experienced in painting the figures and things like that. So like, you know, I mean, obviously there are forums and I'm sure that Reddit has a bunch of info. How did you actually find somebody who could give you more direct application and advice?
Well, yeah, like you said, there like YouTube and Reddit have like tons of stuff out there now. Like they had like there you could if I'd wanted to, I could have just started from there and watched a bunch of stuff on there and read guides and stuff. But one of my best friends, former roommate of mine, is an excellent painter. He's been doing it for 20 years. He's like a high school art teacher too, so he's very good at like instructing on this sort of stuff. And he's been trying to get me to play Warhammer for well over 10 years. And
right.
He's like, I know you'd love it. Just do it. And so I finally did it. And he's like, all right, let's sit down and let me teach you how to do this properly. And over the course of like 2 days, because we did like the priming and all the other stuff that you have to do for it, he showed me how to paint. So I was really lucky. I had someone that I'm close to that like and wanted to teach me how to do that. But like when he started in the early 2000s, you know, when he's a teen, there was nothing out there really.
Right.
Like a handful of like little people posting about it on their blogs or something maybe. But there's, you know, no YouTube, none of that sort of stuff. You had to have somebody like you'd go to a game shop and have somebody teach you how to do it. And maybe you'd come across a guy who did something really cool. Like you're really like, oh fuck that, you know, that Eldar looks awesome. How did you get that effect? And then they'd teach you. And that's how everything spread. But now there's a ton of techniques out there and there's a million ways to do it. But it's a little more homogenized and like the way that all of that stuff is done. So like the quality has gone way up. Like if you look at the stuff that was painted 20 years ago, like it would be laughed at now. Like the technology is better, the techniques are better, the knowledge is better, but like it's I don't know, there that kind of magic of like, oh, I ran into a guy and he taught me something that nobody else around here knows how to do is so cool though.
Yeah.
That's the thing I think I was just going to say that's the thing that I think with like the like brick and mortar shops like that. I mean, obviously the brick and mortar hobby shops are pretty much always in and out. Like while they're there, you have to appreciate them. Totally. You can find that pervert who's been looking to like it's almost like a vampire. Like when you're in something that niche where you're like you're looking to bring one more person into the brood. And that guy's floating around there, and it's like
it's not like every gaming hobby like that is like there's always I
noticed you were looking at the miniature trees over there. Can I interest you in some other miniature hobby game? But
how do you feel about trains?
pretty great. Pretty great.
I think a lot of people in hobbies are very into trains.
Oh yeah,
for an obvious reason.
I went into a trains hobby store in the suburbs. It was like booming. It was like a Saturday, and just like all the old guys in there going crazy, getting whatever epoxies you use to make to make water, and then you spray it with an air chuck so you get ripples and looking at all that stuff. I was like, oh man, it would be so fun to make a Hot Wheels track.
And see, that's another cool thing about the hobby stuff, like the miniatures hobby, is that all the different flavors of it have different techniques and stuff, and it's cool when you can like learn from somebody else's. Like there's a huge amount of people, mostly women, that paint miniature horses. And like just like nobody paints fur better than these people. We have so much to learn from that when we're like painting our beasts and stuff. Like we should talk to them how to do it. Like these miniature train guys, like they know so much about like making water and terrain and stuff.
Rust.
Like we need to talk to these guys. The model plane guys have their own thing. Like they do glass really well and stuff like that. So like it's really, really interesting, like looking up those things. Like I've done that before, like looking up those things, like how do these guys use their airbrushes and stuff. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like with the internet and stuff, like have you had? Because like obviously you kind of had an inlet to the real world with someone,
Sure.
but it's like like how have you found it to be like, oh, like so much of this information and time is like online, and there's so easy to find people online to talk about it. Like, how do you take that into the real world and like actually like facilitate relationships that way, or have you not been able to?
I mean, with Warhammer, it's been I haven't done much of that. Like I did I painted all that stuff, but like playing a game of Warhammer is so much work. I've only played like a handful of actual games of it. And it was one where I kind of decided like this one is for, this is a private club here. I'm not taking this one to the hobby shops. I've seen over my 20 some years of being a nerd and going to hobby shops that like I don't want to hang out with the war gamers. So like I mean I it's mostly just and honestly I really like the painting and that stuff of it much better anyway. I don't feel like going to a hobby shop and playing. I am totally content with playing a couple games a year with my friends that play and doing my painting and posting it online. I am totally fine with that.
Yeah, I think that's at the end of the day, that's all it is. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing is like and it's something that I think we want to talk about just generally. It's just like the levels of commitment or whatever makes sense to you,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you want to play like role play games, you don't have to like DM something every week. Like you can do a once a month thing, like whatever the time commitment you have is. Because for a lot of people, it's like I can half do a lot of stuff, but then it stops being very fun. Or it actually pushes into where it's like this stuff, the part of it you don't actually enjoy doing that much. Like for tie-dye for me, like there are people that produce 20 or 30 pieces a week. And I'm just like, that's not at all what interests me about this art form. Like that's a business. That's just a business.
Right. Yeah. At that point, like, I mean, when I was doing Warhammer painting a lot, I was like very prolific for the short amount of time I was doing it. I mean, I painted my first army in 30 days, like a 2,000 point army. And most people are like, that's a year's worth of work to them. Like if I can find the motivation to do that shit, great. But it has to be like very fun at the time. And like, the motivation waned. I don't quite have it right now. But I'll get it back. The dog in me meter will go back up, at some point. But yeah, I mean, like we're doing this for fun. So like, what's the point of pushing yourself a lot at the beginning? Like of these sort of things, it's great to do them a lot because you're learning so fast and you get that reward. That you want to keep doing it. Like I was like, hell yeah, I'll go out and paint out in my garage for 6 hours a night. Like I'm getting so much better at this. This fucking rocks. I love this new thing. But it's a honeymoon period for sure.
Yeah, once you get tolerance to the fumes.
Yeah.
You're not getting as high.
Oh, and there are so many fumes.
I know
the glue, the paints, the thinners. Oh yeah.
We had a
resins.
cosplay suit guy who's like a coworker who like made like a
cool.
a Batman suit, but he was like doing it in his apartment one night, and he was just like, wife had to take me to the hospital. Like inhaled too many Batman suit fumes. And we're just like, holy shit, man. He's like, yeah, it looks sick though. You're like, yeah, man, it does look sick.
It was worth 3% of my brain capacity to make that Batman suit though. Yeah, sure, man.
But I think that's an important point. Just that the earliest phase of the hobby, everything is exciting and new. Yes. You figure a technique out, you learn how to do something, you're buying shit, which rules.
Buying shit rules. Yeah, absolutely. Like gear, I love gear,
Absolutely.
It fucking rocks.
Yeah. It's the best.
It's the best to figure out the perfect combination of gear, what all the forums say is the perfect combination of gear. buying that, then coming up with an opinion why that gear is not as good, is overrated now.
Finding the weird niche stuff that like you don't know is bad yet, but you're like, I'm gonna be that guy.
Being the person that's done 5 hours of the hobby, but you found the hipster item of gear to have.
Yes,
That's one of the best feelings in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you think the hobby is going to go for you? Like, how are you going to expand and find new interests?
That one I just want to keep painting. I have like an army that I'm almost done with. A Necron army that I really like. Is heavily inspired by that prolific hobby streak painter I was talking about earlier, Dana Howell. Like her videos are awesome, and it's kind of like these bright neon pinks and stuff with them that I really, really like. So I just have a couple of like big pieces left to go on that. I want to finish out, and like I have like 2 or 3 other armies like planned out in my head that I want to do. So like really the future of it for me is just like I just want to keep finishing these things, like keep finishing these pieces, get better at it. I mean, I don't really have the interest that like some people do where they're like, I'm gonna win a golden demon, which is like the big like trophy thing that you get for these competitions. I don't have any interest in that. I don't want to do the things where it's like, yeah, I spent 12 hours on this one little guy making everything perfect. Part of it for me is like, I don't know, kind of the industriousness of it. Like I like being able to like look at all this shit I painted. I kicked out so much stuff and it looks good. So like, yeah, I mean, I just want to paint more armies. It's fun. Like I like doing it. I like amassing them and making and taking my little pictures of them and shit. And you know, then play a dozen games a year or something.
Yeah. How, I guess, like as we're wrapping up here, like I guess if someone is interested in doing this, like what would be a good kind of track to follow? Because that's kind of, we want to expose people. We're exposing people to new hobbies, so we want to. I feel like we should, get a little bit of a user's guide from our local experts.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you have someone that can teach you how to do it, do that. That's always going to be the best. And it's like a good way to spend some time with your friends. Like, I love it when a friend of mine is like, expresses interest in a hobby I have. That's like the greatest feeling in the world.
Absolutely.
To like introduce something like that to somebody, like teach somebody how to play Magic or, something like that. That's awesome. It feels so good. Like, if you can do that, do that. I mean, other than that, there's so many guides on YouTube or that you can search up on how to get into miniature painting, and it'll be for whatever flavor of it you want to do. If it's wargaming, whatever, there's a million guides out there, and there's a ton of good ones. You are like, you can't spit without hitting a good one, basically. But yeah, I'll keep plugging that one. Dana Howell, she has a great series on it, on like. It's like a 101 level course sort of thing. It's kind of designed as for miniature hobbying, where it starts with all the stuff, how to use the X-Acto knife to cut the things off of the sprues. That's what it's called when they're on the little plastic thing. Like how to cut them off the sprues, how to like do all that stuff right, how to prime them, how to do all this shit. Like, yeah, she has a really, really great series on it. Giving a bunch of free advertising to her.
And like how much would you say it takes to get in the door?
I mean, if you just want to grab some paints and a box of models, I mean, a set of Warhammer models, look up what army you kind of want to play. There's tons of videos on that too about which one you should play, and then just get a box of their like basic units. Get a box of guardsmen or some orc boys, whatever you want to do, and then just get. Probably, you're probably looking at $80, $90 total to kind of get your foot in the door on this stuff, but you will end up spending a lot more than that. You will always find a tutorial that uses some sort of like color shifting paint or some other weird shit that you hadn't thought of, and you will get into that. You will be like, I need an airbrush now.
Is there one piece of gear that you wish you would have got earlier?
Airbrush. Yeah. Airbrush is so good. Love that thing. I didn't get it until like towards the end of the first army that I made in the first 30 days, or at least I didn't set it up. My friend gave me one, but I didn't set it up until then. And especially nice for like big things.
Right.
And so I'd painted like 6 tanks all by hand, and it fucking sucked. When I did like my big Valkyrie dropship though, I was just like, oh, this rocks. Like this piece is this is so easy. I can do like cool little effects on the glass and stuff. Like the airbrush is awesome. I use it on like every figure now.
Do you have like a compressor one, or do you just have one of the little cans? Okay.
Yeah,
I just got the cans. I tried.
Yeah.
I still have to finish it. I have like a '67 Bronco, and so I've like painted.
Cool.
I've like painted the body like Carolina blue, but I haven't gone.
Awesome. That's really cool.
The gluing and all
awesome.
that is the stuff I don't like. Painting is fun.
Yeah. No, I have a little one with a little compressor that goes off every 15 seconds while I'm using it and shit. And gets kind of annoying because I have a little leak in it too. So it just is like, I can zone it out, now I can tune it out. But it's definitely my favorite thing that I've gotten by far, that I recommend like everybody gets if they're getting into this.
I mean, I think that, it's, thank you for sharing that and going through your process and how you got to where you are. Oh, he just muted.
Oh yeah, thanks for letting me go all hyperfixation on talking about one of my hobbies. There's nothing kinder you can do for a nerd than letting them do something like that. So yeah, thank you guys.
Exactly. It's time that we shone a light on things you can do in your own home.
That's
and
right.
then find a few people on the internet who will listen to you talk about it.
Yes. Perfect.
Do we have you back now?
I don't think
he looks so close. All right,
there he goes.
He's back.
Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I think my microphone crapped out or something.
Yeah.
So it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I'll just record myself saying goodbye, and then it was fine because you guys kept it going.
Yeah, professional.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for us. I think. I think that's as much as we can possibly do for right now. Thank you so much for coming on, and
thanks for having me on. It's very fun.
And
I like doing somebody else's podcast for a change.
Right?
It's great.
And we'll see everybody down the road. Safe travels. Bye.